It was past midnight when one look changed everything, and I couldn't look away. The city felt unusually quiet that night, as if the world had exhaled and paused. Streetlights cast long, golden reflections on the wet pavement, and the faint hum of distant traffic added a rhythmic backdrop to my solitary walk. I had finished my shift later than usual, and the chill in the air made me pull my coat a little tighter. My mind was half occupied with mundane thoughts, half drifting toward a rare sense of rest that came with walking alone at such an hour. Then I noticed her. She was sitting alone outside a small, almost hidden cafe, the warm light spilling out from inside and painting her in a soft, amber glow. She looked up from her book just as I slowed my pace, and our eyes met for a brief, suspended moment. It wasn't the kind of glance that happens by accident and disappears in a heartbeat. There was something else, a quiet recognition, like two strangers passing each other on a familiar street in a dream. Her posture was relaxed but deliberate. She held the book with gentle confidence, her fingers curling slightly over the edges, and her shoulders were just slightly forward, attentive yet at ease. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and warm, drifting toward me with the night breeze. It wasn't overpowering. It was subtle, like a memory brushing past without warning. I hesitated, wondering if I should keep walking or step closer. Something about her presence pulled me forward, curiosity mixing with a strange, unnameable desire. She offered a small, polite smile, and I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly, replaced by a quiet intrigue. My steps slowed even more, and I realized I hadn't felt this drawn to someone in a long time. Not like this, where a single look could make the world shrink down to the space between us. The cafe itself seemed ordinary, yet in that moment, it became a stage for something extraordinary. The soft clink of a teacup from inside punctuated the silence, a delicate reminder of normal life continuing around us while everything between us hung suspended. The light caught the curve of her cheek, the slight tilt of her head as if she were reading me as much as I was reading her. I caught myself imagining what it would be like to speak to her, to hear her voice, to know what thoughts were hidden behind those calm, observant eyes. But I didn't move too fast. There was a need to linger, to let the moment stretch just a little longer. And so, I lingered on the sidewalk, caught between the pull of the unknown and the comforting hum of the ordinary night. For a brief, perfect moment, nothing else existed. Just the quiet street, the warm glow of the cafe, and a single look that seemed to pull me in, deeper than I realized I could fall, even before a word had been exchanged. The warm glow of the cafe invited me in, though I told myself it was just for a coffee. Every step closer to her felt like a risk I was willing to take, a silent admission that curiosity had taken hold. She looked up from her book as I entered, and our eyes met again. Not just by chance this time, but as if the universe had arranged for this very moment. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the smallness of my own hands and the awkwardness of my gait. I approached cautiously, careful not to disturb the quiet that seemed to surround her. She didn't look surprised, only mildly amused, as if she had been expecting someone. Or maybe she had simply noticed me earlier and found it interesting that I had lingered. "Late night?" I asked, my voice a little too loud in the hushed cafe. She looked up fully this time, and her smile, soft, knowing, and just a little shy, made the corner of my chest tighten. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and even, but warm enough to make the small space between us feel intimate. "And you?" I laughed softly, the sound more nervous than intended. "Same. Just needed some air, I guess." She nodded, eyes flicking back to her book before settling on me again, steady and observant. It's rare to see someone out this late and not rushing. Usually the street is full of people who look like they're running from something. Her words weren't teasing exactly, but there was a quiet humor in them that made my chest loosen. We fell into a tentative conversation. It was awkward at first, me fumbling for small talk about the weather, the neighborhood, and the book she was reading. But each word, each pause, was layered with something unspoken. Every time I spoke, I noticed the subtle shifts in her posture. The way her shoulders eased when she smiled, how her fingers played with the edge of her mug, twisting it slightly, almost unconsciously. There was grace in her movements, effortless yet intentional, and I found myself mesmerized by them. Her laughter came suddenly, soft and light, like the gentle brush of silk against wood. I caught the way the corners of her eyes crinkled, and for a moment I felt as if I had stumbled into a private warmth, a quiet connection that existed only between us. As we talked, I became painfully aware of the age difference. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, a world weariness that I had yet to experience. But it didn't feel like a barrier. Instead, it made every glance, every pause more charged. A slow, simmering tension that neither of us was ready to name. When she glanced at me again, the briefest brush of her hand against the table near mine sent a shiver down my spine. I caught myself imagining a moment where our hands might touch, lingering just slightly longer than necessary. Yet, even in that thought, there was respect, a gentle recognition that this connection, fragile and new, was worth savoring slowly. By the time we parted for the night, the cafe seemed ordinary again. But the warmth of her presence lingered, pressing softly against my mind and heart. One conversation, a few exchanged words, and already I felt tethered to her in ways I couldn't explain. The world outside felt colder, quieter, yet somehow richer, because in that brief hour, I had glimpsed something rare, a connection that was only beginning to pull me in. She closed her book reluctantly, marking the page with a delicate finger as if reluctant to let the night end. "I suppose I should head home," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make the words linger in the space between us. "I can walk you to the subway," I offered almost automatically, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a small, quiet smile, and together we stepped out into the night. The streets were empty, save for the occasional hum of a distant car and the whisper of wind through the trees. The streetlights above cast a gentle, golden glow, pooling in circles on the pavement. Shadows danced lightly with each step we took, merging our forms into a single, fleeting silhouette. The night smelled faintly of rain from earlier in the day, earthy and fresh, and I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from her coat as we walked side by side. We spoke in hushed tones, carefully navigating the rhythm of conversation. Small details, a favorite cafe, a childhood memory, a moment of regret or hope, spilled out slowly, like secrets pressed between lips. Each confession, however minor, felt significant because it was shared in this quiet intimacy, where no one else existed except us and the soft, glowing streets. I caught myself stealing glances at her when she wasn't looking. The graceful way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the curve of her smile when a memory delighted her, the gentle way her hands brushed against her scarf. Every motion was deliberate yet unstudied, elegant without trying to be noticed. A moment came when the sidewalk narrowed, and we instinctively drew closer. Our shoulders brushed lightly, and the contact sent a ripple of awareness through me. I noticed how her perfume seemed to bloom in the cool night air, subtle and intoxicating, grounding me in the present. I imagined the warmth of her hand, the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat if we were to touch, and yet, I didn't reach for it. Not yet. The slow, simmering tension of restraint made the connection more profound than any sudden gesture could. She paused near a lamppost, looking up at the flickering light. "It's strange," she said, voice quiet, reflective, "how some nights feel heavier, yet lighter at the same time." Her words struck a chord I didn't quite understand, but I nodded, sensing the shared emotion in the silence that followed. A gust of wind caught my coat, and for a brief second, our hands brushed as we both adjusted it instinctively. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, the contact lingered, a silent acknowledgement of something unspoken. The air around us seemed charged with possibility, fragile yet undeniable. By the time we reached the subway entrance, the magic of the night felt like a fragile secret we had shared. We lingered for a moment, not yet ready to say goodbye, our eyes holding more conversation than words could express. And when I finally walked away, I realized that the memory of her presence, the warmth of our brief touches, and the quiet intimacy of our shared steps had already left a mark on my heart, a mark that would not fade with the night. Weeks passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. Our late-night meetings became ritualistic, small moments strung together like delicate beads on an invisible thread. Coffee at the same corner cafe, walks under the dim glow of streetlights, or shared benches in the park where the city felt far away. Each encounter was careful, slow, deliberate, and with every passing day, the magnetic pull between us grew stronger, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. It was a Thursday night, unusually cold for late autumn, and the cafe had emptied except for us. She sat opposite me, hands wrapped around her mug, the warmth seeping into her fingers and, somehow, into me. I noticed how she fiddled with the edge of her scarf, a gesture that had become intimately familiar over time, signaling thoughtfulness or hesitation. "I haven't told anyone this in years," she began, her voice low and tentative, as if speaking aloud could make the words fragile and fragile things could shatter. I leaned forward slightly, the heat from my coffee mingling with the warmth of the small lamp between us. My attention was entirely hers, yet I felt a sudden, protective awareness of her vulnerability. She confessed something deeply personal, a past heartbreak, a fear she rarely voiced, a moment of weakness that had shaped her life. I could see the weight of it in her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her lips pressed together to keep from trembling. Her gaze met mine, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. I wanted to reach across the table, to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear, to offer some silent reassurance that she was seen and not alone. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting her words sink into the space between us. And then, almost unconsciously, my hand moved, just slightly, hovering near hers before settling gently on the edge of her mug. Our fingers brushed lightly. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it carried more meaning than words could convey. Her eyes softened, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. It was in that moment I realized the depth of our connection. Not just the magnetic pull, but the trust, the quiet intimacy that had been building through each shared glance, each carefully chosen word, each subtle gesture. She was allowing herself to be vulnerable with me, and I felt both honored and terrified by the responsibility of that trust. We sat like that for a while, sipping coffee in companionable silence. Every subtle movement, the way she adjusted her coat, the tilt of her head, the brief brush of her hand against mine, heightened the awareness between us. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, longing tempered by patience, desire restrained by respect. As the night wore on, I felt a warmth spread through me that wasn't just from the coffee or the lamp. It was the warmth of understanding, of connection, of two people slowly letting down their defenses in each other's presence. And though no grand declaration was made, the bond had shifted, deepened. There was no rush, no need for immediate resolution, only the quiet certainty that whatever was beginning between us was real, tender, and worth waiting for. The days after our quiet confessions should have felt lighter, more effortless, but instead, a subtle tension began to weave its way into our interactions. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. A delayed reply to a message, a fleeting glance that felt heavier than it should, a faint distance in her tone. Yet, it was enough to make my chest tighten with a nervous, unacknowledged worry. I remember the evening clearly. I had been waiting at our usual cafe, the one with the amber glow spilling onto the sidewalk, and the world outside felt impossibly quiet. My coffee had gone cold, unnoticed, as I scanned the empty street, anticipating her arrival. When she finally walked in, there was a hesitation in her steps that I hadn't seen before. She looked around as if unsure of herself, her eyes finally settling on me with a flicker of something guarded, worry, perhaps, or fear of judgment. "Hey!" I said softly, trying to bridge the invisible distance that had crept between us. "Hey!" she replied, her voice calm but with an edge of fragility I couldn't ignore. She sat down opposite me, carefully folding her hands over the mug, a subtle barrier between us. There was a pause, long enough that it became almost unbearable. I wanted to ask what was wrong, to reach across and take her hand, but I hesitated, unsure if I should press or give her space. Finally, she spoke. I don't know if this is wise," she said quietly. "People notice things, and sometimes things can get complicated." Her words hit me like a cold gust. I understood the world outside might see our connection as unusual, perhaps inappropriate, given our age difference. But it wasn't just that. There was a fragility in her tone, a fear of vulnerability being exposed to a world that didn't understand the quiet depth of what we were building. "I get it," I said, my voice firm yet gentle. "But I also know what we have. It's real. And real doesn't need anyone else's permission." She looked down, tracing invisible patterns on the table with a fingertip, and I noticed the faint quiver in her hands. The emotional storm that had been brewing between us finally broke through, not in anger, but in a vulnerable release of tension. She spoke of past disappointments, of the caution she had learned to wear like armor, and of her fear that getting too close might invite pain. I listened carefully, every word sinking in, and when she finally looked up, her eyes glimmering with unspoken fear and longing, I reached across the table. My hand brushed hers, light and tentative, yet purposeful. She didn't pull away. The touch was fleeting but spoke volumes. Reassurance, patience, understanding. The storm didn't disappear immediately. The air was thick with tension and unspoken desire, with the fear of stepping too close and the ache of wanting to. But in that moment, I realized that storms could also clear the air. Our connection was tested, yes, but it had survived the first gust of doubt, emerging stronger and more resilient, ready to move forward, slowly, deliberately, and tenderly. A few days had passed since the stormy night at the cafe. I hadn't heard from her, and the absence of her presence was heavier than I expected. The city felt colder, the streets quieter, and every ordinary sound seemed amplified. The distant rumble of traffic, the hum of neon signs, the faint clatter of footsteps on wet pavement. I found myself wondering whether the distance she had put between us was permanent, or if it was simply her way of processing emotions too big to contain. Then she appeared, not in a dramatic, sudden way. She simply walked into the park where I had gone to clear my mind, the lamplights casting pools of gold that flickered over the damp path. She stopped a few feet away, hesitant, yet unmistakably present. Our eyes met, and the tension that had been building for days suddenly condensed into a single, breathless moment. The air seemed heavier, charged with everything we had left unspoken. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said softly, her voice carrying both apology and relief. The slight quiver betrayed her calm tone, revealing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "I understand," I replied, my voice low, careful, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate bubble we had created. I needed to understand too. We walked side by side along the quiet paths, footsteps measured, almost synchronized. The night was cool, crisp, and carried the faint scent of autumn leaves, a grounding contrast to the storm of emotions swirling silently between us. Every glance, every small movement, the brush of her sleeve against mine, the way her eyes darted toward mine and then away, spoke volumes. Words were not enough. The connection pulsed in the spaces between them. At a small bridge overlooking a trickling fountain, she stopped and turned toward me. The city lights reflected in her eyes, soft and steady, and I felt my chest tighten. Our conversation paused, the silence more intimate than any words could be. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she folded them in front of her, and instinctively, my hand moved toward hers. The brief, light contact, fingers brushing, lingering, sent a warmth through both of us. It was electric, tender, and entirely unspoken. We finally spoke, softly, carefully, acknowledging the feelings we had both been holding back. No grand gestures, no declarations of love yet, just recognition. Recognition that the pull between us was undeniable, that the trust and vulnerability we had nurtured were real, and that the fear of the outside world could not diminish what we felt. Her gaze softened, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles, and she allowed the subtle closeness we had been dancing around. We walked a few more steps, shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of her presence a tangible comfort against the crisp night air. Every glance, every gentle brush of hands, every shared smile was a silent acknowledgement. We had reached a turning point. For the first time, I felt it, the quiet certainty that our connection had moved beyond hesitation. It was no longer just curiosity, attraction, or fleeting tension. It was something deeper, tender and patient, and ready to blossom if only we allowed it to. The night had shifted, and so had we, silently, irrevocably, and beautifully. The night had settled into a calm rhythm, quiet and unhurried, as if the city itself had agreed to give us this moment. We found ourselves at her apartment building, a modest, warmly lit space tucked away from the bustle of late-night streets. There was no rush to say goodbye, no anxious eagerness, just the lingering presence of two people who had walked through fear, doubt, and longing together, arriving finally at a place of gentle understanding. She opened the door and gestured for me to enter, a subtle invitation that carried more weight than any words. I stepped inside, and the soft lighting caught the gentle contours of her face, highlighting the warmth in her eyes. She moved with a quiet grace, and I noticed the faint scent of vanilla in the room, comforting and intimate, mingling with the lingering crispness of the night air. We settled into the living room, sitting close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly. The space between us was small, but it carried an intimacy that made every movement feel significant. She offered me tea, and as I held the warm cup, I noticed how her fingers lightly touched mine while handing it over. A fleeting, tender contact that spoke of trust, care, and unspoken affection. The conversation that evening was gentle, reflective. We spoke about small things, favorite books, music, memories, but beneath the surface, every glance and pause carried deeper meaning. Her laughter, soft and unhurried, filled the space, and I realized how much I had missed it in the days we had spent apart. Every subtle gesture, a hand resting near mine, a glance that lingered just a little too long, a sigh that spoke volumes, strengthened the fragile bridge between us, built over weeks of slow, careful connection. At one point, she reached across and brushed a strand of hair from my face, her fingertips grazing my cheek. The touch was simple, yet it resonated with the weight of all our shared moments, tender and deliberate. I caught her hand gently, holding it for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, and we both smiled, silently acknowledging what words could not fully capture. We lingered like that for hours, talking softly, sometimes in silence, simply enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. It was in the quiet moments, the subtle shift of a shoulder, the brush of a hand, the warmth of a hug, that the true depth of our connection revealed itself. It was patient, respectful, and undeniably intimate. A romance born not from sudden passion but from understanding, trust, and mutual care. When the night finally edged toward morning, we shared a quiet hug at the door, her cheek resting lightly against my chest. I felt the steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her body, and the soft rise and fall of her breath, all grounding me in the reality of what we had found in each other. Neither words nor grand gestures were necessary. The emotional intimacy we had nurtured spoke for itself. As I stepped out into the early morning air, I felt a rare kind of contentment. The age difference, the uncertainty, the outside world's opinions, none of it mattered. What mattered was the quiet, steadfast bond we had created, and the promise of something tender and enduring. Our story, slow-burning and delicate, had reached its first beautiful, unhurried resolution. And in that resolution, I realized I had finally found someone who saw me, understood me, and let me feel fully alive. After midnight, after one look, after all the hesitant steps we had taken together. If you love slow-burn age-gap romances filled with emotion, heart, and tenderness, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts on this story. Have you ever felt a connection that changed everything in just one look?